Taylor, a respected doctor, had it all: a loving wife, 2 children, and a life that seemed picture perfect. But as his wife Lucy lay dying in the ICU, Gregory's true intentions were unfolding in secret. What no one knew was that he was preparing a new life with his mistress Amanda as Lucy's body decayed just down the hall. This is a chilling story of betrayal, deception, and murder, one man's double life that shattered everything he once held dear. Gregory Taylor had always been the picture of success as a well-established doctor in a prestigious hospital. He commanded respect from his colleagues and admiration from his patients. His family life seemed equally perfect. Married to Lucy, his high school sweetheart, with 2 children who adored him, they lived in a beautiful suburban home, a place where the white picket fence and manicured lawn screamed of a life filled with happiness and stability. Their life was the kind of life most people dream of having, a life others envied. Lucy was the heart of the family. She was warm and kind, and the type of person who could light up any room she entered. Together, Gregory and Lucy had built a life that many would consider flawless. They had celebrated anniversaries, birthdays, and milestones, always showing the world the strength of their love. No one suspected the cracks that were slowly beginning to form beneath the surface. The problem started innocently enough. Lucy complained of feeling unusually tired, her energy levels lower than usual. At first they chalked it up to the stress of balancing family life with Gregory's demanding career, but then her headaches started. They worsened with each passing day, and soon she began to lose weight despite eating normally. Her once vibrant appearance faded, and Gregory grew increasingly concerned. After a series of medical tests, the results came back like a punch to the gut. Lucy had been diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer. The news shook Gregory to his core. How could this happen to the woman he loved? How could someone so full of life be suddenly ravaged by an illness so cruel and unforgiving? The doctors gave them the grim prognosis: she had months, maybe even weeks left. It was a diagnosis no one could prepare for. At first, Gregory focused all his energy on supporting Lucy. He spent his days with her in the hospital, doing everything he could to comfort her as the disease took its toll. He held her hand during the treatments, helped her navigate the exhausting chemotherapy sessions, and tried to reassure her that everything would be okay, even when he knew that was far from the truth. Yet as the weeks passed, something within Gregory began to change. At the hospital where he spent long hours as a doctor, he couldn't help but notice Amanda. She was a young nurse who worked on the oncology floor where Lucy was receiving her treatment. Amanda had a youthful energy about her, a lightness that was in stark contrast to the somber atmosphere of the hospital. Her smile was infectious, and there was something about her that made Gregory feel alive again. She would often stop by his office check in on him or bring him a coffee during his long shifts. Their conversation started as casual exchanges, but soon they became something more. Amanda was attentive, always listening with genuine interest. When Gregory spoke, she would laugh at his jokes, and there was an ease between them that Gregory hadn't felt in years. He found himself looking forward to her visits, craving the moments when she would bring a sense of warmth and normally amidst the sterile, lifeless halls of the hospital. It wasn't long before their professional relationship blurred into something personal. They began exchanging texts after work, sometimes meeting for coffee, sometimes just talking late into the night. Gregory knew it was wrong. He knew that as a married man he should have been focused on Lucy, on his dying wife. But Lucy's health continued to decline rapidly. She was no longer the vibrant woman he had married. She was frail, barely able to speak or move without assistance. The woman he had once known was disappearing before his eyes, leaving a shell of the person she used to be. Gregory found himself struggling with the intense grief and helplessness that came with watching his wife suffer, and somewhere along the way his connection with Amanda began to fill the empty spaces inside him. What started as a simple distraction became a full-blown affair. Gregory found himself fantasizing about a life with Amanda, one without the weight of illness, without the daily reminders of death. He began to make plans for a future, one that no longer included Lucy. Every visit to the hospital, every conversation with Amanda seemed like a breath of fresh air in a life that had grown suffocating. But Gregory was careful, meticulous, even not to let his secret slip. No one suspected the truth. He kept up the facade of the loving husband, the dedicated doctor. He continued to visit Lucy in the ICU, holding her hand and promising that everything would be okay. Even as his mind wandered to thoughts of Amanda, it was a game, a dangerous game that he thought he could control. But as his wife condition worsened. Gregory's actions would soon catch up with him in ways he never could have anticipated. The facade he had so carefully crafted was starting to crack as the weeks passed. Gregory's life became an increasingly twisted web of deceit. By day he was a devoted husband sitting by Lucy's side in the coupe pretending to hold on to help, while by night he was entangled in a forbidden relationship with Amanda. The contrast between these two worlds couldn't have been more stark, yet Gregory managed to keep them separate, at least for the time being. On the outside his life seemed normal, even admirable, but beneath the surface something far darker was unfolding. Amanda had quickly become more than just a distraction. Gregory had been drawn to her youthful energy, her warmth, her compassion, everything his wife had once been but was now too sick to be. With every passing day Lucy's body weakened further. Her once bright eyes were now sunken, her skin pale and blotchy from the harsh treatments. Gregory couldn't stand to see her like that. She was slipping away, and with her so was his will to fight for their marriage. His thoughts were consumed with Amanda, their stolen moments together, their late-night conversations, and the sense of relief she brought him in a time when his life seemed to be falling apart. Amanda, for her part, seemed equally swept up in the affair. She was younger than Gregory by several years, and though she had a kind and caring demeanor toward her patients, she was undeniably attracted to him. She would often offer him small gestures of comfort, cooking him dinner on a night shift, leaving little notes in his office. Their bond grew deeper, a connection Gregory couldn't ignore. He started to confide in her, telling her things he had never told Lucy. He spoke of his frustrations with the marriage, his feelings of guilt, and his desire to escape the suffocating reality of his life. Amanda listened patiently, offering him the empathy and understanding that he so desperately craved for the first time in a long while. Gregory felt seen, truly seen, and not just as a doctor or a husband but as a man who was slowly unraveling. The affair escalated quickly. It wasn't just stolen glances anymore or brief moments of laughter in the hallway. Gregory began sneaking away from the hospital during his shifts, meeting Amanda at nearby hotels or her apartment. There they would talk, kiss, and explore a relationship that was completely disconnected from his reality. The guilt he felt for betraying Lucy was buried under the weight of the excitement he felt with Amanda. The danger of the affair made it all the more thrilling, but as much as Gregory tried to suppress the nagging feeling of what he was doing to his wife, the guilt would sometimes creep back, and especially as he sat at Lucy's bedside watching her grow weaker by the day. But in the moments when Gregory allowed himself to be consumed by the affair, it was as though Lucy didn't exist. He wasn't thinking about her cancer, her pain, or the future they were supposed to share. Instead he thought of Amanda, the way she made him feel alive again, the way she filled the emptiness that had grown between him and Lucy. It was as if Amanda had taken on the role of the wife he had abandoned, offering him a fresh start of new beginning. Gregory told himself that once Lucy was gone he could move on without any more guilt. He could marry Amanda, build a life together, and forget about the mess his marriage had become. During these months Gregory kept up appearances. He was always at Lucy's side when visitors came, always the loving husband in front of family and friends. He played the part so well that no one suspected his secret life. His colleagues at the hospital saw him as a dedicated professional, fiercely focused on his work, and a compassionate husband. His friends and family admired him for his unwavering support of Lucy during her illness, but no one could see the cracks in his carefully crafted persona. No one knew that behind closed doors Gregory was preparing for a future with Amanda. Gregory had even started making plans for the house while Lucy was confined to the hospital. He began redecorating a room in their home, a bedroom that once belonged to their children but that would soon become a sanctuary for Amanda. He cleared out old furniture, made sure the space was just right, and even bought new sheets, fresh flowers, and soft lighting. He imagined Amanda's face lighting up when she stepped into the room for the first time, envisioning the life they would soon share under the same roof. In Gregory's mind this was his escape. Lucy's death would be the final release, and he could finally have the life he had been craving, a life without the burden of a dying wife and without the constant reminders of their crumbling marriage. But what Gregory didn't realize was how quickly things were beginning to unravel. Though he thought he had everything under control, there were people around him who had begun to notice the changes in his behavior. A nurse who had worked alongside Gregory for years began to see the way he would linger too long in hallways when Amanda was around. Andy the nurse was no fool. She had seen the signs before, how couples in crisis often sought comfort in the arms of others. The whispers in the hall started quiet at first but growing louder still. Gregory believed he could control the situation. He was convinced that as long as Lucy wasn't aware, nothing would go wrong. Little did he know his carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down as the days turned into weeks. The tension in Gregory's life continued to build. He had convinced himself that the end of Lucy's suffering was near and with it the beginning of his new life with Amanda, but what he failed to anticipate was just how quickly things could spiral out of control. The facade that had been so carefully constructed was now starting to crack under the weight of his deceit. Gregory had overlooked one critical element. People were watching. Lucy's condition, once stable, had begun to take a dramatic turn for the worse. Her once vibrant skin had become shallow and her breathing had become shallow and labored. The doctors had done all they could, but the cancer was relentless, consuming her from the inside out. She had stopped recognizing Gregory during some of her worst moments, muttering incoherently in her sleep. Gregory, still spending hours by her side in the ICU, had grown increasingly frustrated with the situation. He wasn't just dealing with a wife who was fading away, he was dealing with his own growing sense of guilt and anxiety. His double life had begun to take a toll on him, both physically and emotionally. Amanda, however, seemed completely unaware of the extent of Gregory's internal struggle. In her eyes he was still the man who would whisk her away to a new life, a life where they could be together without the shadow of illness or responsibility. She continued to send him messages of encouragement, little love notes hidden in his office, and brief stolen moments of intimacy when they could escape the confines of the hospital. Each time Gregory saw her, the weight of his choices seemed to grow heavier, but he pushed the gooey guilt aside, telling himself that once Lucy was gone he could finally be free to live the life he had always wanted. But then everything changed in an instant. It was a Thursday afternoon when Gregory arrived at the hospital to find that Lucy's condition had worsened dramatically. Her body had begun to fail in ways the doctors hadn't anticipated. Her organs were shutting down one by one. Her doctor, a close colleague of Gregory's, gently pulled him aside and told him that it was only a matter of hours before she would slip into a coma and then ultimately die. It was the moment Gregory had been dreading, but also the moment he had been secretly anticipating for months. Lucy's condition had deteriorated so quickly that there was no time for her family to say their goodbyes. Gregory, knowing that his affair had already put a strain on his marriage, suddenly found himself in a race against time. He had to make sure that Amanda's life was secured before Lucy's death became public knowledge. He had already set the wheels in motion for the room he had prepared for Amanda at the house. It was waiting for her, waiting for the life he had planned. But in that moment, standing at Lucy's bedside with her barely clinging to life, Gregory's carefully laid plans began to unravel. Lucy, in her delirium, suddenly reached out and gripped his hand with surprising strength. Her eyes, cloudy and unfocused, met his. For a brief moment she seemed to recognize him, and in that fleeting moment Gregory was reminded of the woman he had once loved, a woman who had stood by his side through every hardship, every triumph. It was as if time slowed for just a heartbeat, and the weight of what he had done to her, the lies, the affair, the secret preparations for his new life, came crashing down on him. All at once he felt a pang of guilt so sharp it almost took his breath away. But before he could process the emotions that had flooded his mind, the moment passed. Lucy's eyes fluttered shut and her hand relaxed in his. The nurses had been moving around the room, preparing for what they knew was coming. The end was near and there was nothing more they could do for her. The reality of the situation hit Gregory like a tidal wave. Lucy was dying and there was nothing he could do to stop it. He had been preparing for this moment, but now that it was here he wasn't sure he was ready for it. The guilt he had suppressed for so long was overwhelming and he felt like he was drowning in it. Yet even in the midst of this turmoil there was another thought that lingered in the back of his mind. Amanda, he had made promises to her and he had to keep them. The temptation to escape the reality of his wife's death, to move on quickly, was almost too strong to resist. As the minutes stretched into hours, Gregory stood there torn between his duty to his wife and the life he had been secretly building with Amanda. What Gregory didn't know was that the hospital staff, including some of his closest colleagues, had begun to notice the strange behavior between him and Amanda, the late-night meetings, the lingering glances, the subtle touches and they thought no one was looking. It hadn't gone unnoticed. Nurses had begun to gossip, and hushed tones and whispers of Gregory's infidelity were starting to spread through the hospital. But it wasn't just the hospital staff who were watching. Lucy's best friend Claire had been visiting her regularly during her treatment. Claire had always been suspicious of Gregory's actions, sensing that something was off. Even when Lucy had remained oblivious to the changes in her husband, Claire knew that something was wrong, but she couldn't put her finger on it. As she watched Gregory at Lucy's bedside, she saw the telltale signs of someone who was emotionally checked out, someone who was already preparing for life after death. Lucy's condition continued to decline rapidly, and with each passing minute the walls that Gregory had built around his affair seemed to grow thinner. The weight of his lies and the consequences of his actions were closing in, and Gregory could no longer avoid the truth. His double life was on the verge of being exposed, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The inevitable happened sooner than Gregory had anticipated. By the early hours of the following morning, Lucy's life had slipped away quietly, leaving behind a room full of somber silence. Gregory stood there holding her cold hand, his heart filled with a complex mixture of relief and sorrow. It was over the woman who had once been his wife, the woman who had supported him through every challenge and triumph was gone. But as he stood there, the reality of what he had done to her began to hit him. His betrayal, his affair with Amanda, had never seemed as real as it did in that moment. In the quiet aftermath of Lucy's passing, the truth of his actions seemed to come crashing down on him. He had spent the final days of her life planning his escape, obsessing over his new life with Amanda, while the woman who had loved him so deeply lay dying in the ICU. And yet the moment didn't last long. Gregory was quick to compose himself, his mind now clouded by the guilt of his actions. Was Al 80 racing ahead to what came next? Amanda was waiting. She had been waiting for this moment too, and Gregory knew she would be expecting him to keep his promise. He quickly slipped away from the hospital, leaving behind his wife's lifeless body and the grief-stricken friends and family who had gathered to say their goodbyes. There was no time for mourning, not for Gregory. There was only time to move forward with the life he had been dreaming of. Amanda was waiting for him at her apartment when he arrived, looking every bit the part of the eager lover who had been anticipating this moment. She greeted him with open arms, a smile that seemed to promise everything Gregory had longed for. He tried to act as though everything was normal, as though Lucy's death hadn't just occurred hours earlier. He kissed Amanda, pushing aside the weight of his guilt, and for a brief moment he allowed himself to feel the relief of freedom. But as they sat together talking about the future, the nagging feeling in Gregory's chest wouldn't go away. He felt a strange emptiness that he couldn't explain. He had been so focused on the affair, on planning his new life, that he hadn't allowed himself the time to process what had just happened. He had watched his wife deteriorate, and now she was gone, and all he could think about was how quickly he had moved on. Amanda noticed the shift in his mood, but she didn't comment on it. Instead, she offered words of reassurance, promising him that everything would be fine. Now they could finally be together, and the past would fade into nothingness. Despite her comforting words, Gregory's mind kept returning to the last moments he had spent with Lucy. She had been so frail, so vulnerable, and yet he had been planning his escape the entire time. He had let her slip away, convinced that once she was gone everything would be different, but now that she was truly gone, he wasn't sure what to feel. The life he had dreamed of with Amanda now seemed less certain, more fragile. What had once seemed like the perfect escape now felt hollow. The days following Lucy's death were filled with practical matters, funeral arrangements, meetings with the lawyers, and the inevitable flow of condolences from friends and family. But through it all, Gregory couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. There were moments when he would catch himself thinking about the life he had left behind, about the memories with Lucy that he could never fully erase. Even as he and Amanda began to talk about their future together, there was a part of Gregory that wondered if he had done came to light. For Gregory, there was no way out. His past was catching up with him, and the lies, the betrayal, and the death of his wife had all led to this moment. No matter how hard he tried to outrun the consequences, he knew he couldn't escape them any longer. His world, once filled with secrets and carefully crafted illusions, was beginning to crumble, and in the wreckage there was no one left to blame but himself.